He said he did it before the body was even found. Welcome to Hercule Puzzles. I am your host, Craden. Where are you watching from? Comment below. I love seeing this detective family grow. Thanks for being here. Let's solve it. It was precisely 7 in the evening when the scream echoed through the marbled corridors of Harrington Hall, sharp enough to halt a footman mid-stride and send a flurry of pearls scattering across the drawing-room floor. Within moments, Lady Agatha Harrington's lifeless body was found sprawled on the Oberson rug of her private study, a delicate silver letter opener driven cleanly into her chest. Her hand clutched a crumpled note, her face curiously serene. Outside, the autumn rain splashed against the tall bay windows, muffling the rising panic inside the grand estate. It had been meant to be a quiet weekend gathering, just family and a few close companions. But death, as it often does in such stately homes, arrived uninvited. By 7:30, Inspector Blunt from the local constabulary had taken charge. A stout, practical man with a ruddy complexion and little patience for subtlety. He wasted no time declaring it a clear-cut case, for standing near the study door, trembling, pale, and soaked to the skin, was Charles Lavery, Lady Agatha's personal secretary. He'd been missing since tea. Now, with blood on his cuff and panic in his voice, he proclaimed loudly, "I killed her. I killed Lady Harrington. Oh God, what have I done?" To the inspector, the matter was closed before it had begun. But among the guests now huddled in the drawing-room under heavy tapestries and tense silence was one Monsieur Hercule Poirot, vacationing on invitation from his old friend Colonel Levesque. The celebrated Belgian detective had remained curiously calm throughout the chaos. While others panicked, Poirot had neatly removed a speck of mud from his patent leather shoe with a folded handkerchief, then quietly asked to see the body. Upon inspection of the crime scene, Poirot stood still for a long moment, his head slightly tilted. His gaze lingered not on the wound, but the position of the curtains, the faint smear of ink on the desk, and the angle of the broken quill that lay near the blotter. He said nothing. Later that evening, as the body was taken away and the guests were escorted back to their rooms, Poirot remained in the hallway with Inspector Blunt, who still seemed quite satisfied with the confession. "It's clear as daylight," the inspector grumbled, scribbling in his notebook. "The secretary was in love with her sick in the head, no doubt. Everyone knows she was about to dismiss him. Jealousy, fear, a fit of madness, it all adds up." Poirot gave a polite nod. "Ah, yes. It adds up most conveniently, and yet, mon ami, I find I am not yet persuaded." Blunt frowned. "You think the secretary's lying?" Poirot's mustache twitched ever so slightly. "No, I think he believes what he says, which is far more troubling." The following morning, the guests were summoned to remain in the estate until further notice. The Harringtons were a small but varied party. Colonel Levesque, the retired army man with a stiff gait and an abundance of pride. Miss Isabel Harrington, Lady Agatha's niece, intelligent but distant. Mr. Edwin Goyle, a solicitor with hawkish eyes and a habit of speaking only when absolutely necessary, and Mrs. Lenora Claiborne, a widow with connections in Parliament, and a history of discreet affairs. All had been present at the estate since Friday. Poirot dined alone, requesting boiled eggs and black coffee precisely as he preferred. After breakfast, he returned to the study. The room had been left untouched overnight. He examined the desk again, his fingers never quite touching anything. He murmured quietly to himself, a murder with a confession, too swift, too neat, too lacking in, how do you say, resistance, and the note. Yes, the note she clutched. Why write a note if she was caught off guard? He peered at the waste-paper basket. Beneath torn envelopes and a discarded menu, he found a ripped fragment of cream stationery, its edge stained with ink. A name, hastily scrawled but unmistakable. Isobel. By noon. He had spoken to each guest in passing, observing more than inquiring. Isobel avoided eye contact and held her tea with a trembling hand. Colonel Levesque insisted on recounting his service years, subtly directing conversation away from Lady Agatha's affairs. Edwin Goyle said little, but watched everyone with unnerving stillness. Lenora Claiborne seemed the calmest of all, even amused, as if already preparing a dinner anecdote for her next political circle. At 1:30, Poirot requested a meeting with Charles Lavery in his temporary holding room on the ground floor. The secretary, barely 30, looked crushed by guilt, wringing his hands and barely meeting Poirot's gaze. I confessed because I did it, he said hoarsely. I snapped. She said I was useless, that I had until Sunday to pack. I was furious. I don't remember picking up the letter opener, but the next thing I knew she was on the floor. Poirot said nothing at first. Then he leaned forward. Tell me, monsieur, did she scream? Lavery blinked. No, I don't think so. I don't remember. Ah, that is interesting. Because the scream heard by at least 4 people occurred before you entered the room. Curious. Lavery stared blankly. I don't understand. Neither do I, but I intend to. As Poirot left the room, he caught sight of the household maid, a quiet girl named Elsie, wiping the baseboards near the stairs. She was not scheduled to work today. He raised an eyebrow. Tell me, mademoiselle, he said gently, why return to work when tragedy is still so fresh? She looked startled. I live on the estate, sir. I didn't think it wrong to help. Ah, you are loyal. That is admirable. But sometimes, mademoiselle, loyalty can be used against you. She looked down quickly, and Poirot did not press. Further. By evening, Poirot had requested the guests gather in the drawing-room once more. Inspector Blunt grumbled, but complied. Poirot stood by the fireplace, hands behind his back. My friends, he began, you believe the matter is solved. But I believe we are all victims of haste. A man has confessed, yes, but not because he is guilty. No, he confessed because someone wished him to, someone who planned for him to. The room grew still. I will ask you to remain here, he said, for soon I shall have questions and answers. But first I must take a walk in the rose garden. And without another word, Poirot stepped into the stormy dusk. his silhouette vanishing into the garden paths as if chasing the scent of deceit. Through the autumn air, the rain had stopped by the time Hercule Poirot entered the rose garden, leaving behind a damp hush that clung to the hedgerows and scattered petals. The air smelled faintly of soil and fading perfume, Lady Agatha's favourite corner of the estate, curated with almost fanatical care. But it was not the roses that drew Poirot's attention. His patent leather shoes moved with purpose along the gravel path until he paused at a stone bench beneath a trellis of drooping white blooms. There, just as he had suspected, lay a fragment of paper curled and water-stained, but not yet ruined. He retrieved it with a gloved hand. It was the second part of the note Lady Agatha had clutched in death, not torn hastily, but deliberately separated, as if someone had wished to ensure only part of it was found. The paper matched precisely in texture and watermark to the crumpled piece collected by Inspector Blunt the night before. This one, however, bore no name, only a phrase in slanted ink. "Have until Sunday to tell them, or I shall." Poirot tucked the fragment carefully into his inner pocket, then turned on his heel and returned to the manor. Inside, the atmosphere had grown brittle. Isabel paced near the drawing-room window, her eyes fixed on the dripping branches outside. Colonel Levesque sat in a rigid posture, polishing the rim of his brandy glass with a handkerchief far more vigorously than necessary. Goyle stood by the fireplace, arms folded, saying nothing. Mrs. Claiborne sat reading a book, lips twitching slightly, as though she were reading a particularly satisfying twist in a novel. Poirot's return broke the silence. He entered the room without announcement, nodding politely as he addressed the guests. "Messieurs, mesdames, I would ask you to indulge me a moment longer. I shall not keep you waiting much longer than necessary." A Sobel's voice, brittle but sharp, cut in. "Why are we still being questioned?" Charles Lavery confessed. "What else is there to uncover?" Poirot's brow lifted. "Indeed, mademoiselle. What else? It is the question that fascinates me, particularly when things appear too simple." Colonel Levesque gave a harumph. "Not everything needs to be a game of chess, Poirot. Sometimes a crime is just what it looks like. And yet, Colonel, even in chess, one must look beyond the first move to see the checkmate." Poirot turned to the inspector, who stood by with crossed arms. "You have not yet returned the personal effects of Lady Agatha, I presume?" Blunt shrugged. "We've logged them. Her handbag, diary, a few letters." "Why?" "I would like to examine the diary, if you please." Moments later, Poirot sat in the study, flipping carefully through the small, leather-bound volume. Lady Agatha's handwriting was precise, clipped, and unsentimental. Pages recorded meals, appointments, social obligations, and, more notably, veiled references to something unnamed. Thursday spoke to Elle again. He insists it was an accident. I'm unconvinced. If true, then someone else was present. Saturday. E is becoming bold. I must act before it is taken out of my hands. Sunday. No word from I. If she refuses to confront him, I shall. It cannot remain buried. Poirot folded his hands. "So many initials," he murmured. "And yet each one is sharp enough to cut." Later that afternoon, Poirot found Goyle alone in the library, thumbing through a volume of legal commentary. The solicitor glanced up, but said nothing. Monsieur Goyle, Poirot began. You were Lady Agatha's lawyer, were you not? I represented her for estate matters. Yes. Then perhaps you can explain why her will updated last month remains unsigned. That drew a flicker of expression. Goyle closed the book. Because she was waiting. For what? Goyle gave a measured look. For confirmation. There was a dispute in the family. She wanted to remove someone as a beneficiary, but needed proof first. Ah, Poirot said softly. And did she find that proof? Goyle's jaw tightened. She believed she had, but she never showed it to me. Did she tell you the nature of the betrayal? No. Then you are very cautious, monsieur. I am a solicitor. Caution is part of the profession. Poirot smiled faintly. We, and silence, also, by dinner time. Poirot returned again to Inspector Blunt. Tell me, Inspector, when you searched the secretary, did you find anything unusual? Only the blood on his cuff, a handkerchief, and a matchbook from some hotel in Paris. Paris? Curious. Did Lady Agatha travel recently? No record of it. Then it is not hers. Might I see it? Blunt handed it over. The matchbook was gold embossed from La Hattel Magnifique. Inside, a single unused match remained. Poirot stared at it, then quietly pocketed the item. He turned toward the drawing room again, but paused. A shape moved quickly near the staircase. The maid, Elsie. She froze as Poirot approached. Mademoiselle, he said kindly, do you recognize this? He held up the matchbook. Her lips parted. Yes, sir. That belonged to Mr. Lavery. Ah, you quite sure? I saw it fall from his coat last week. I picked it up and gave it back. And he said it was from a friend in Paris. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Merci, mademoiselle. One last thing. Did you hear the scream last night? She hesitated. Yes. Where were you? I was in the corridor. I was coming to bring tea to Lady Agatha. She always asked for it before retiring. But when I heard the scream, I ran. I didn't look inside. He studied her closely. And why not? She looked down. Because she had asked not to be disturbed that evening. Poirot paused. And yet, you brought tea, her voice lowered to a whisper, because I knew she'd forgotten to write something in the ledger. She always wrote her accounting on Saturday. She hadn't. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, so she was distracted, or preparing something else entirely. The girl nodded. That night, Poirot sat alone in his guest room, laying objects across. The writing desk, the torn note, the matchbook, a page from the diary, and a copy of the unsigned will. He drew them together with the precision of a puzzle solver fitting edge pieces first. A confession with no scream. A second half of a note no one claimed to have written. A change in the will without a signature. A solicitor who speaks too carefully. A niece named in a fragment. And a maid who sees what she does not say. He tapped the desk gently. It is almost curious, and yet it fits. Outside his window, thunder grumbled once more over the moors. He stood and adjusted his cuffs. Tomorrow, he said aloud, we gather everyone, and then the first real lie will be tested. At precisely 11 o'clock the next morning, Hercule Poirot summoned the household to the drawing-room. The heavy curtains had been drawn back, allowing pale light to spill across the Persian rug where Lady Agatha's body had been laid just 2 nights earlier. The atmosphere was tense. Each guest had obeyed the summons without protest, but their expressions varied. Colonel Levesque's jaw was set in indignation, Isobel's face pale and unreadable. Edwin Goyle's eyes narrowed with suspicion, and Lenora Claiborne, as always, appeared vaguely amused, as though attending a tedious but necessary society engagement. Charles Lavery, still under guard, had been brought in separately. He looked exhausted, slumped in a chair near the wall, barely acknowledging the others. His once crisp collar now wilted, and the ink stains on his fingers had grown darker, smudged from nervous rubbing. Poirot stood at the center of the room, hands clasped neatly behind his back. He looked at none of them directly as he began to speak. "Ms. Amice, I thank you for your patience. You believe this matter is concluded. I do not. A woman has died. A man has confessed. But the truth, I think, is not yet visible to the naked eye. And so, we must observe not with haste, but with precision." Inspector Blunt shifted on his feet. "Poirot, with all due respect, if the man says he did it, he says he did it." Poirot interrupted. "But on what do we base that? Panic, guilt, suggestion? He believes himself guilty. Yes, but belief is not the same as truth, and I intend to find the truth, no matter how inconvenient it may be." Poirot walked slowly across the room, stopping before Isabel. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "Lady Agatha was your aunt, was she not?" "Yes," she said quietly. "And you lived here, in the house?" "Yes, I moved in last year." "Did you love your aunt?" Isabel hesitated. "Yes, I did. But," she blinked, "there is no but. She was strict, demanding. But she gave me everything." Poirot nodded. "Indeed. But I wonder, was she about to take something back?" Her eyes flickered. "What do you mean?" Poirot stepped aside, gesturing toward the writing desk in the corner. Lady Agatha began. "A new will. She did not finish it. Perhaps she hesitated, or perhaps she needed confirmation before removing someone from her good graces, perhaps someone close." Goyle spoke for the first time. "With respect, Poirot, that's pure speculation." "None, monsieur. It is deduction, and as her solicitor, you would have known the implications." Poirot turned next to Mrs. Claiborne. "Madam, you visited Harrington Hall often, I believe." "Oh, yes," she said with a faint smile. "Lady Agatha and I shared a bridge club in London. Were you aware of any entanglements in her household?" She shrugged. "Entanglements? No. But this house has always had undercurrents. Secrets swirl in silence, Poirot. It is the nature of money and inheritance." Poirot's gaze swept the room. "Precisely. And what, then, do we make of this?" From his pocket he produced the 2 parts of the torn note and laid them carefully on the coffee table. This was not written in haste. It was composed with care. The first part, found clutched in Lady Agatha's hand. The second, buried beneath the roses. It reads, "You have until Sunday to tell them, or I shall." He looked around. Who among you was Lady Agatha threatening, and what truth did she plan to reveal? The silence was immediate and telling. Poirot stepped toward Lavery Jew. "Monsieur confessed to her murder, and yet you did not hear her scream, though, for others did. She was alive when the scream occurred. You entered afterward. That means someone else was there before you, someone who left the note, or tried to remove it." Lavery looked lost. "But I found her like that. I thought I must have done it." "I don't remember." Poirot raised a hand. "Guilt can be planted, monsieur, especially in those who already feel shame. You said she had threatened to dismiss you. But what if it was not professional failure that caused her anger? What if it was something you discovered, or someone you were protecting?" Lavery's head rose slightly. "Protecting?" Poirot's voice lowered. "Monsieur Lavery, are you in love with Miss Isabel?" Lavery froze. Poirot did not wait for an answer. He turned sharply to the others. Lady Agatha was preparing to remove someone from her will. She left a note, threatening to reveal a secret. The fragment bears Miss Isobel's name. She was the one she expected to act before Sunday. What secret could provoke such desperation? Goyle stood abruptly. "Poirot, you're making accusations." "Without basis, no, monsieur," Poirot said sharply. "I am tracing steps, and one step in particular puzzles me." He produced the matchbook from his other pocket. "This was found in Mr. Lavery's coat, from a Parisian hotel. He says it was a gift. Yet Lady Agatha has not travelled to Paris in years. So then, who gave it to him? And why does the last page of her diary mention someone being bold? And he?" Poirot turned fully to Goyle. "Edwin Goyle, a solicitor with access to all documents, influence over the will, and the discretion to conceal indiscretions. Did you think she would not learn about the funds missing from the family trust, or that Isabel would not stumble across the ledgers?" Goyle said nothing, his eyes unreadable. Poirot continued. "Lady Agatha gave you until Sunday. She threatened exposure, and perhaps Miss Isabel, discovering the truth, confided in Mr. Lavery. Perhaps she even begged him to stay silent. But someone else acted first. Someone who could not risk the truth." Poirot's voice dropped, suddenly intimate. "Tell me, Monsieur Goyle, where were you at 7 o'clock on the night of the murder?" Goyle's jaw clenched. "I was in the library. Can anyone verify that?" No one spoke. Poirot nodded slowly. "Of course not." The room remained suspended in stillness. Even the inspector said nothing. Poirot turned to Lavery. "You found her dying. That is what happened. You did not kill her, but someone ensured that you would believe you had." Isabel stared at Goyle, her face white as chalk. "You told me it was an accident, that she fell." Goyle's expression turned hard. "That's enough." Poirot took a step closer. "Ah, so you confessed to speaking with her just before her death." Goyle said nothing, but the silence was louder than denial. Poirot stepped back, folding his arms. "This is not yet the end," he said quietly, "but we are near it. A lie has been exposed, and now Someone must choose between one final deception or the truth. He turned to Inspector Blunt. Keep them all here. Tomorrow morning, I will reveal everything. And with that, Hercule Poirot left the room, his footsteps echoing on the tiled floor, leaving behind a roomful of suspects with nowhere left to hide. The storm had passed, but tension still lingered like fog in the halls of Harrington Hall. Breakfast was a silent affair the next morning. Even the clatter of cutlery seemed subdued, as if the very walls were eavesdropping. Colonel Levesque took his usual seat at the head of the table, cutting his toast with military precision. Mrs. Claiborne sipped her tea with infuriating calm, and Isabel toyed with her boiled egg, untouched. Goyle did not appear. Charles Lavery, under watch, had been served separately. At precisely 9, Poirot requested the presence of Elsie, the maid, in the small sitting room adjacent to the dining hall. Inspector Blunt remained in the doorway, arms folded. The young maid looked anxious, fingers clutching her apron, eyes darting between Poirot and the inspector. Mademoiselle, Poirot began gently, I must trouble you again. This time, I ask not about what you saw, but what you heard. Elsie's voice was soft. I'd already told you about the scream, sir. Yes, but not what followed. She hesitated. Poirot leaned forward. It is not you I suspect, but you saw more than you wished to admit. If you lie to protect someone, you do not protect justice. Elsie glanced at the inspector, then whispered, After the scream, I waited. I didn't go to the room. I was too afraid. I heard the study door open. Someone came out and went upstairs. Quiet steps. Not running. Not Mr. Lavery. No, sir. Mr. Lavery came a bit later. He ran. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Did you see who it was? She paused, then shook her head. No, but I saw the light under the door. It went dark just before Mr. Lavery screamed. Poirot tapped the side of his chair. So, someone was with Lady Agatha between the scream and Mr. Lavery's arrival. That changes the entire order of events. Elsie looked confused. Sir, it means the scream was not from the act of murder, but from confrontation. The murder came after, and that means Lavery could not have committed it. He stood abruptly. Thank you, mademoiselle. You may go. But please, if you recall anything else, however small, tell me immediately. Poirot found Blunt still watching. A voice may be silenced. Inspector, but footsteps do not lie. And our murderer, it seems, wears soft soles. They parted ways, and Poirot returned to the library. Inside, Edwin Goyle stood by the fireplace, staring into the unlit grate. He did not turn when Poirot entered. So this is how it ends? Goyle asked flatly. I hope not, monsieur. I still prefer endings with elegance. Goyle sighed. I've made mistakes, but I'm not a killer. Let us test that, Poirot said, stepping closer. The note left in Lady Agatha's hand, did you write it? No, but you recognized its message. I did. You had motive. You feared exposure. The will was being changed. Goyle turned. She threatened, but she never acted. I could have made it right. Yet the opportunity slipped. And then murder. Goyle's face hardened. You think I lost control? I didn't. Poirot tilted his head. Perhaps not. Perhaps it was something else panic. Or were you not the only one who stood to lose? Goyle's silence deepened. Poirot stepped even closer, lowering his voice. Tell me the truth, not the version that protects your pride. Did Isabel know about the thefts? Goyle's lips parted, but he didn't answer. That was answer enough. Poirot left him standing by the fire and moved to the drawing room, where Mrs. Claiborne now lounged with a cigarette. She greeted him with a faint smirk. You'll find your culprit eventually, Monsieur Poirot. You always do. I have found many, he replied. But the question is, will they speak? She exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. Wealth, pride, fear. They're terrible companions. You should know. You speak as though you have observed a great deal. I listen more than people think. And I know this Lady Agatha wasn't. Planning to die, Poirot studied her. And yet someone made that decision for her. Mrs. Claiborne tapped ash into a porcelain dish. I wouldn't be surprised if it was someone close. No outsider did this. It was someone here. And whom do you suspect? She smiled. Isn't that your game, monsieur? Poirot inclined his head and excused himself. Upstairs, he found Isabel seated on a bench near the hallway window, staring at the grey horizon. Mademoiselle, he said quietly, I must speak plainly. She looked up but didn't move. You loved your aunt, but you discovered something she did not forgive, or perhaps you feared she would not. Did you write the note? No, but she expected something from you. What was it? Isobel's eyes shimmered, then dropped. She wanted me to confront Edwin about the money. She found out before I did. She said I had to choose between silence and honesty. I asked for time. You feared what it would do to Charles. Her voice cracked. He didn't know. I couldn't tell him. I was afraid it would ruin everything. Poirot's tone softened. And now, I don't know what to believe. Poirot nodded. Do you believe Charles killed her? She shook her head. No, I believe. Someone wanted me to believe that. Poirot stood still for a long time. Then he said, Tomorrow, I will gather everyone. There will be no more guessing. The truth will walk into the room, whether it is ready or not. That evening, Poirot sat in solitude again. His desk now cleared except for a single slip of paper and a photograph. It was an old picture of Lady Agatha smiling in a London garden, with a young girl beside her Isabel. On the paper, Poirot had written 6 names. He crossed out none. Instead, he drew a line between 2. 2 people had motive, he murmured. One feared discovery, the other feared loss. But only one struck the final blow, and the clue was not in the blood, but in the scream. At dawn, Poirot rang for the housekeeper. Madam, he said firmly, please prepare the drawing room. Chairs for all guests. We conclude this matter today. At precisely 11 the next morning, the drawing room of Harrington Hall was arranged as instructed. 6 chairs formed a semicircle facing the fireplace, where Poirot stood like an actor preparing for his final act. The windows had been opened just enough to let in the soft breeze, clearing the scent of stillness that had lingered since Lady Agatha's death. On the coffee table lay the objects that now formed the spine of the investigation: the torn note, the Paris matchbook, the diary page, and a fresh envelope containing Lady Agatha's unsigned will. The guests entered one by one. Colonel Levesque strode in first, eyes firm, arms crossed behind his back. Isobel followed, slower than usual, her complexion pale but calm. Edwin Goyle entered silently, glancing only once toward the table. Mrs. Claiborne glided in with her habitual grace, offering Poirot a nod before taking her seat. Charles Lavery was last, escorted by Inspector Blunt, who remained standing by the door. Poirot waited until all was settled before he spoke. "Ms. Amis," he began, "thank you. This will not take long, because now I am ready." He looked to Charles Lavery first. "Monsieur Lavery, you confessed to a crime you did not commit. And why? Because guilt was planted in you. A panic triggered not by memory, but by circumstance. You arrived at the study to find Lady Agatha dead. You assumed the worst. But what you failed to realize, what your accuser counted on you failing to realize, was the timing." Poirot held up the torn note. "This was meant to be found. It implicates Isobel by name and carries a threat. But it was never sent. Lady Agatha did not mail it, nor did she hand it over. She kept it close to close, because she knew what it meant. She knew someone might intercept it." He turned to Goyle. "She showed it to you, didn't she? Or at least you learned of it. And with it came a fear, not just of disgrace, but prosecution. Embezzlement, forgery crimes with real weight. Your position, your status, even your career, everything depended on that note never being revealed. And so, when she told you she would expose it, I didn't kill her," Goyle said, standing suddenly. "You did not mean to," Poirot said firmly, "but you confronted her. In the study." The scream heard throughout the house came not from pain, but from fury. She raised her voice, perhaps even struck you. And you, monsieur, in the heat of that confrontation, struck back. Goyle's hands clenched. "That's not. You picked up the nearest object, not with premeditation, but impulse, a letter opener, clean, sharp, ornate. And suddenly Lady Agatha fell. There was blood, silence. Goyle said nothing. Poirot went on. Then you remembered Lavery. You knew he had quarreled with her earlier. That day, you knew he was outside. So you panicked. You planted the note in her hand. You waited until he approached, then slipped away, unseen by all but one Elsie. She heard your steps on the stairs, but did not recognize you. That, monsieur, was your one miscalculation." Inspector Blunt straightened, but said nothing. Poirot turned now to Isobel. "Mademoiselle, you were unaware of the full extent of Goyle's thefts, but you knew enough to cause doubt. That is why he targeted you in the note. Not to accuse, but to deflect. If anyone searched motives, they would find yours a changed will, perhaps a threatened inheritance. But it was not your secret. You were only a pawn." Isobel shook her head slowly. "I knew something was wrong, but I was too afraid to say it." Poirot stepped closer to the table and picked up the matchbook. "This, to Monsieur Goyle, was a gift from a woman in Paris, a client, a mistress, The specifics do not concern me. But Lavery carried it, and you let him. Because it tied him to someone mysterious. Because it made him look worldly, perhaps even deceitful. Goyle's voice was low. You think I framed him from the start. I think you recognized opportunity. It was not a plan until it became necessity. Poirot returned the matchbook to the table, then picked up the diary entry. He read aloud, Saturday, he is becoming bold. I must act before it is taken. Out of my hands. He looked directly at Goyle. You were the E. Bold enough to gamble with another man's reputation, but not bold enough to confess. Goyle's eyes fell, but he said nothing. Poirot turned next to the others. Colonel Levesque. Mrs. Claiborne, your presence here was unfortunate. Mademoiselle, you were unaware of the full extent of Goyle's thefts, but you knew enough to cause doubt. That is why he targeted you in the note, not to accuse, but to deflect. If anyone searched motives, they would find yours had changed. Will, perhaps a threatened inheritance, but it was not your secret. You were only a pawn. Isabel shook her head slowly. I knew something was wrong, but I was too afraid to say it. Poirot stepped closer to the table and picked up the matchbook. This, to Monsieur Goyle, was a gift from a woman in Paris, a client, a mistress. The specifics do not concern me, but Lavery carried it, and you let him. Because it tied him to someone mysterious, because it made him look worldly, perhaps even deceitful. Goyle's voice was low. You think I framed him from the start. I think you recognized opportunity. It was not a plan until it became necessity. Poirot returned the matchbook to the table, then picked up the diary entry. He read aloud, Saturday, he is becoming bold. I must act before it is taken. Out of my hands. He looked directly at Goyle. You were the E. Bold enough to gamble with another man's reputation, but not bold enough to confess. Goyle's eyes fell, but he said nothing. Poirot turned next to the others. Colonel Levesque. Mrs. Claiborne, your presence here was unfortunate, but not connected. I thank you for your patience. Colonel Levesque grunted. And what about justice? Poirot. What do you propose? Poirot looked to Blunt. Inspector, you have your man. Whether this was impulsive or calculated, the law must decide. But make no mistake, it was not Lavery who killed Lady Agatha. He was merely the perfect scapegoat. Blunt approached Goyle without a word. There was no struggle. Goyle raised his hands slowly, then glanced at Isabel. I never wanted to hurt her, he said softly. I thought I could fix it before she acted. But Poirot's voice was like a guillotine. You thought only of yourself, and so you silenced the one person who might have forgiven you. As Blunt led him away, the room remained still. Isabel sat in silence, eyes red but dry. Mrs. Claiborne lit another cigarette and muttered, Well, there goes the weekend. Colonel Levesque turned to Poirot. You're a cold one, Poirot. No, monsieur, Poirot replied. I am simply precise. Later that evening, Poirot stood once more in the rose garden. This time alone. The breeze had shifted, warm and almost pleasant now. He knelt slightly to pluck a petal from the bush beneath which he had found the second half of the note. There was no satisfaction in solving a murder, only clarity. He whispered to the air, "Lady Agatha, you left your affairs unfinished. But perhaps now there is peace." And then, quietly, he turned back toward the house, shoes leaving no trace on the gravel path. Though Edwin Goyle had been taken into custody by Inspector Blunt, and the case appeared, on the surface, resolved, Hercule Poirot's mind was not yet at rest. He had solved many crimes in his career neatly, precisely, with the certainty that comes when every piece of the puzzle locks into place. And yet, this one did not settle. Not quite. There was something, a detail so small it had been drowned in the drama of the confession and rest, but it now floated to the surface like a forgotten key. It was nearly midnight when Poirot rose from his bed, fully dressed, and lit the small oil lamp in his room. He took out Lady Agatha's diary once more, flipping through its final entries. The writing was calm, unwavering, even on the day of her death. But Poirot's eye caught something, one entry unlike the rest. Thursday, I will speak to Elle in the morning. It is not enough that he denies it. I must know for myself. I will not be made a fool of again. Poirot whispered, Elle, not Lavery, Levesque. The Colonel. Poirot rose, silent and swift, and moved down the hallway. He had no need to knock. He knew Levesque would be awake. Soldiers never sleep deeply in unfamiliar places. As expected. The Colonel answered the door, still in uniform trousers and shirt, suspenders hanging loosely from his shoulders. "Can I help you, Monsieur Poirot?" he asked. Poirot wasted no time. "You were involved with Lady Agatha. Not romantically, strategically." Levesque's brow lifted. "You're accusing me now." "No, I am correcting an oversight. She trusted you, confided in you. You helped her uncover Goyle's misdeeds. And yet, in her diary, she says he denies it. She was speaking of someone she had trusted more deeply than Goyle. Someone who had been with her before." Levesque exhaled slowly and stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, Poirot noticed the Colonel's suitcase was already packed. "You were preparing to leave." "I had a posting to resume. I didn't expect to still be here." "You knew Goyle was a thief?" "I suspected. I told Agatha to check the accounts herself." "She did." Poirot sat. "And what of the other suspicion?" Levesque hesitated. "There was a letter, weeks ago. Agatha said it arrived anonymously. It claimed someone in her household was conspiring against her, that she was being manipulated." Poirot straightened. "And she believed it?" "She laughed at first, but then she stopped mentioning it. You didn't think to show it to anyone. She said she burned it." Poirot leaned forward. "Colonel, what if she didn't?" Levesque's jaw tensed. "Then someone else was involved." Poirot nodded. "That is exactly what I fear." The next morning, before breakfast, Poirot summoned Inspector Blunt one final time. The inspector arrived weary, looking forward to handing the case over. "I've had Goyle transferred to the county station," he said, stretching his back. "He's not speaking much. Solicitors already on the way." Poirot stood beside the drawing-room window, holding a new item in his hand, a page torn from the bottom of Lady Agatha's writing pad. "One not previously reviewed. Inspector, may I trouble you for the letter you collected from Lady Agatha's study, the one You dismissed as trivial correspondence? Blunt frowned. The one with no signature, scribbled in pencil. Poirot nodded. We, that one. Blunt retrieved it from his case. Poirot took it carefully and compared the writing. The paper was identical, the indentations from the sheet. Above matched exactly. Poirot laid both pages flat. It was written here, he said, and it warned her of betrayal from within. Blunt scratched his head. You think someone else wrote that to rattle her? Poirot tapped the page. Or someone tried to steer her suspicions away from the truth. Someone who knew Goyle would eventually be caught and who needed him to take the fall before anyone looked further. By midday, Poirot had returned once again to the staff wing. Requesting a word with Elsie, the young maid looked even more timid than before. Mademoiselle, Poirot said softly, I must ask a delicate question. It concerns your relationship with Lady Agatha. I only served her, sir. Yes, but you knew her patterns, her routines. You knew when she was alone, and when she expected company. So let me ask, was anyone else in the study before Charles Lavery arrived? She shook her head. I didn't see anyone. But you heard the door open before Mr. Lavery. Did you not? Her eyes dropped. Yes, sir. Poirot's tone sharpened. Did you hear footsteps after? She hesitated. Poirot leaned in. Mademoiselle, it is most dangerous to keep secrets now. She bit her lip. I heard heels, not heavy shoes. Light steps, not like Mr. Goyle's, not like the Colonel's. I thought maybe it was Miss Isobel, but I didn't see. Poirot exhaled. Merci. He returned to the drawing room and found Isobel by the fireplace, staring into the unlit grate. She turned as he approached. You think I killed her? She asked, voice flat. No, mademoiselle. I think someone counted on you thinking that you could have. And was someone counted on me thinking so too? Her eyes narrowed. Who? Poirot lifted the anonymous letter and the diary. Someone who crafted the illusion of fear, guilt, and confession and left the pieces scattered just enough to mislead. Someone who had no motive for the murder directly, but whose presence here has been far too perfect. Always observing, always detached. He paused. Mrs. Claiborne. Isobel blinked. What? Poirot walked brisk. She heard your heels, madam, Poirot said. You left the study first, before Lavery, before Goyle. But after the scream, Mrs. Claiborne's smile faded. Poirot continued. You didn't kill Lady Agatha, but you knew she was dead, and you walked away. Blunt snapped his fingers to the constable. Take her into custody. As she was led away, Poirot watched with calm precision. Goyle had killed, but Claiborne had orchestrated Dot in the end. Justice came not from blood, but from silence finally. Broken Dot for many at Harrington Hall. The arrest of Mrs. Lenora Claiborne came as more of a curiosity than a shock. Her poise had always bordered on arrogance, her detachment mistaken for elegance. But for Hercule Poirot, it was the final link, in a chain that had always seemed to deliberately tangled. He stood alone in the hallway after her departure, gazing at the dark oak paneling as though listening for echoes of everything that had been said. And everything that hadn't dotted was not simply a matter of who wielded the blade, but who put it in the right hands at the right moment. Lady Agatha's death had not been a singular act of violence. It had been a culmination of secrets, greed, and calculated manipulation. Goyle had committed the murder, but Mrs. Claiborne had engineered the environment in which the murder became inevitable. Later that evening, Poirot sat quietly in the study once more, the fireplace unlit. The desk cleared, the storm now reduced to a gentle drizzle outside. Isobel entered without knocking. Her expression was weary, but composed, her voice measured. "So it wasn't me. And it wasn't Charles. No, mademoiselle, you were misdirected, deliberately so." She stepped forward, resting a hand on the back of the armchair. Why would she do it? What did my aunt ever do to her? Poirot looked up. Your aunt discovered that Mrs. Claiborne's refined presence masked more than just gossip and bridge games. She was laundering money using Goyle as her intermediary. Lady Agatha threatened to expose it, and that, for a woman of Mrs. Claiborne's stature, was a threat worth neutralizing. She didn't kill her, though. No. But she did everything except strike the blow. She pushed Goyle into desperation. She manipulated Lavery into guilt. She planted doubt between you and everyone else, all while appearing above suspicion. Isobel shook her head slowly. She was like a family friend. Always around, Poirot nodded. Yes, like poison in perfume indetectable until the air thickens. A soft knock interrupted them. Colonel Levesque stood at the door. "May I?" he asked. Poirot gestured him in. The colonel spoke plainly. "Goyle's solicitor has submitted a statement. He's admitting to the embezzlement, but still claims the murder was an accident." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "It may well have been, but it was an accident caused by fear, not by chance." Levesque continued. "He says he went to speak with her. She refused to listen. Said she was writing to the authorities that evening. They argued. She slapped him. He reacted." Poirot folded his hands. "The confession is expected, but it changes nothing. He may not have planned to kill her, but someone else did plan. To use him as a weapon, Claiborne." "Yes." Levesque remained silent a moment. "Do you believe in redemption, Poirot?" Poirot tilted his head. "I believe in clarity. If guilt leads to truth, it is something. If it leads to denial, it is nothing." Levesque gave a half-nod, then left without further comment. Poirot remained behind, alone again, until just before midnight. He then made his way to the servants' corridor. There was one more voice he wished to hear. Elsie, the maid, was just extinguishing the last lantern at the end of the hall when she spotted him. "Monsieur," he smiled gently, "you have helped greatly. Mademoiselle, you told the truth when it mattered." She nodded shyly. "I didn't want to at first. I thought it wasn't my place." Poirot nodded. "And yet, often the most invisible people see the most. You heard the heels. You saw the time of the tea. You noticed what others dismissed." Elsie looked down. "Was I the reason she got caught?" "No, she was the reason. You simply allowed the truth to breathe." He handed her a small envelope. "This is from Lady Agatha's desk. It is a reference letter, written but never posted. She intended to help you secure a position in London. I thought you should have it." Elsie took it with wide eyes, murmuring a thank you so soft it almost vanished into the walls. Poirot turned back, returning once more to his room. The next morning brought a hush over Harrington Hall, not out of respect, but of fatigue. The guests had dwindled. Lavery had packed and left under quiet escort. Isobel remained only to assist with the estate's legal affairs, and Colonel Levesque departed before dawn. Poirot, too, prepared to leave. But before stepping out, he took one final walk through the house. He passed through the gallery, pausing at the portrait of Lady Agatha in her younger days. Regal, unsmiling, resolute. A woman who had seen through people, even when it cost her comfort. He nodded to her image. You were right to be suspicious. You were only wrong about how many shadows one house can cast. As Poirot descended the stairs with his small travel bag, he met Isobel at the front entrance. She looked rested, but her eyes still carried the heaviness of unresolved thoughts. I suppose this place will be empty for a while, she said. Poirot adjusted his hat. Perhaps, but not forgotten. Memory lives in silence, mademoiselle. You must decide what kind of silence this house deserves. She stepped aside to let him pass, but then said, Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for seeing what no one else did. He turned to her. It is not difficult to see. It is only difficult to believe. People show you who they are, always. The question is, do you listen? She nodded faintly. He tipped his hat. Au revoir. Outside, the air was crisp and fresh, the rain finally spent. The taxi waited at the end of the gravel drive, the engine humming gently. Poirot climbed in, sat back, and closed his eyes. Another murder solved, another web untangled. But beneath it all, he felt the quiet truth of this case more than most guilt was not always about action. Sometimes it was about silence, and silence, when cultivated carefully, could become a weapon far more lethal than any blade. The taxi carrying Hercule Poirot had not yet left the village of Brensley Hollow when the driver slowed abruptly near the small post office by the square. A uniformed boy flagged them down. Hurrying over with a telegram in hand, he tapped on the window, and Poirot rolled it down with a raised brow. Monsieur Poirot? Urgent message just delivered from London. Poirot accepted the folded paper, offering a coin in return. The driver resumed course down the narrow lane as Poirot unfolded the telegram, reading it with practiced care. From Inspector J.A.P.P., Scotland Yard Stop. Follow up on Claiborne Goyle financials requested. Interesting connection found. Will await you in London for statement. Urgent. Stop. Poirot frowned. The puzzle, it seemed, was not yet solved entirely. He tapped the window twice, and the driver glanced back. Forgive me, monsieur, Poirot said calmly, but I must trouble you to turn back to Harrington Hall. Something tells me we are not quite finished. The car reversed course. Back at the manor, the staff were surprised, but not alarmed by Poirot's return. He declined tea and asked instead for the housekeeper to retrieve any mail recently posted by Lady Agatha arriving in the last day. After a short delay, he was presented with a handful of items among them. A letter in a plain envelope, addressed in Lady Agatha's elegant hand to a Mr. Henry Cartwright, a retired banker residing in Kent. Poirot opened the letter slowly. "Dear Henry, you were right. I should have acted earlier. You warned me not to trust Lenora, and I did not listen. She has used Edwin Goyle as a front for something I still cannot fully prove. But I know now that the investments she praised so highly were nothing more than a funnel for her own debts. The money is gone, Henry, at least £30,000, siphoned through shell entities. I believe Edwin knows only part of it. She is clever to clever. If anything should happen to me, promise me you'll take this to someone who can investigate without sentiment. I have already spoken to someone capable. You remember Poirot, do you not? I believe he will uncover what I have begun. I feel the walls tightening. If you do not hear from me by the end of the week, I ask you to send this to him. Affectionately, Agatha." Poirot folded the letter and stared into the empty hearth for a long moment. So she had seen it coming. Not the manner of her death, but the conspiracy. He walked to the writing desk and checked the drawer that had previously held the letters there. Was nothing left now? Everything Agatha had, she had placed in the hands of others, and one of them had failed her dot with this new information. Poirot took the train to London that afternoon, the letter sealed again in its envelope, his mind turning slowly over each connection. He met Inspector Japp the next morning in a quiet office at Scotland Yard. Japp greeted him with his usual dry wit. "Back from the countryside already? I thought you liked the air." Poirot set the letter down. "It appears the countryside prefers me to remain engaged." Japp scanned the letter, whistled softly. She was right about the money. Our financial team traced a shell company operating under Claiborne's maiden name Winters Brown Holdings, filed in Gibraltar, transferred close to £35,000 in untraceable increments between 1929 and this year, and Goyle, blind to most of it, she used his accounts for the laundering. But she kept the strings. When he realized it was too late, and Claiborne, Poirot asked, denies everything. But we've got enough to charge her with conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction. She'll face trial soon. Poirot nodded. And what of Cartwright? The letter's recipient, reliable, said Japp, old banking partner of Lady Agatha's late husband. He passed the letter to us the moment it arrived. Would have come sooner, but the post delay was caused by the storm over Brensley Hollow. A shame. If we'd received this earlier, Poirot waved a hand. None. It changes nothing, only clarifies. Madame Claiborne was not simply opportunistic, she was methodical. She created a maze of misdirection, planning her exit before the first question was asked. Japp studied Poirot. What puzzles you now? You look like a man still hunting something. Poirot didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned forward. Tell me, Japp, how long does it take to write a letter like this? One that weighs every word, written by a woman who knew her life might be in danger. Hour at most. Poirot tapped the table. Then who mailed it? Japp frowned. Agatha? But the letter was dated the morning of her death. By all accounts, she never left the manor that day. The housekeeper confirms no stuff went to the post until the following afternoon. Someone else sent it. Then someone didn't want to destroy it, said Jap. Indeed. And that, my friend, is what disturbs me. Poirot returned to Brinsley Hollow later that week, requesting to speak once more with Isabel. She welcomed him in the morning room, now cleaned of crime scene residue and restored to an ordinary elegance. You look like you have more questions, she said. I do, Poirot replied. About a letter your aunt wrote on the morning she died. It was addressed to a Mr. Cartwright. You did not mention it. I didn't know about it, she said. Poirot's gaze was steady. Mademoiselle. Someone posted the letter after Lady Agatha died. Someone who knew what it contained. Someone who wanted her voice to be heard. Isabel hesitated. You think it was me? I think it was you or Lavery. She folded her hands in her lap. It was me. Poirot waited. I found it on her desk when I went in after Charles shouted. She was already gone. The room was chaos, but that envelope had her handwriting, and I saw the name. I remembered she had mentioned Mr. Cartwright once. I didn't open it. I knew it mattered, so I took it, and after they questioned me that night, I snuck out to the village and mailed it myself. Poirot's voice was gentle. Why not tell the police? I didn't trust them. They thought Charles was guilty, and part of me was afraid if I opened it, it might point to me somehow. He nodded slowly. Yet by sending it, you preserved her truth. She gave a sad smile. She was the only family I had left, and I let her down while she was alive. I wasn't going to do it again. Poirot stood. You did the right thing. As he left the manor for what would truly be the last time, Poirot paused in the front corridor, taking one final glance at the staircase, the polished banister, the quiet drawing room beyond the door. Everything had returned to order. Everything except Lady Agatha, whose absence hung heavier than her presence ever had. Outside, the wind rustled faintly through the autumn trees, scattering the last of the golden leaves across the gravel path. Poirot buttoned his coat. It was a curious thing how even the smallest act of conscience could turn the tide of justice. One letter, one moment of instinct, had outmaneuvered a conspiracy meant to bury the truth. And in the end, that letter had done what Lady Agatha could not. It had survived her silence. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since the final rests in the matter of Lady Agatha Harrington's murder, and yet the air at Harrington Hall remained weighed down with the aftermath of what had occurred. The estate, once vibrant with its frequent gatherings and polished appearances, now stood hushed. Isabel remained, but most of the staff had taken temporary leave, and even the gardeners worked in silence, unsure whether they still belonged to a household haunted by scandal. The house had not yet mourned publicly, and perhaps it never would. In London, the wheels of justice turned as they always did, sluggish at first, then steadily gathering speed. Edwin Goyle awaited trial for manslaughter, and Mrs. Lenora Claiborne had been formally charged with conspiracy to defraud and perverting the course of justice. More charges loomed as investigators continued to uncover the layers of her financial schemes, many of which had been operating through shell companies she controlled across Europe. Her wealth had bought her influence for decades. Now, it bought her the best lawyers in the city. But even they could not undo what had already been set in motion by Agatha Harrington's final letter and by Hercule Poirot's relentless pursuit of order. It was on a rainy Tuesday morning that Poirot found himself once more summoned to the chambers of Inspector Japp at Scotland Yard. They met in the inspector's cluttered office, a space overwhelmed by files, teacups, and the occasional cold sausage roll. "You'll be pleased to know," Japp began, waving a hand at a pile of correspondence, "the Claiborne case is nearly locked in. The fraud alone could keep her in prison for 20 years. But combine that with Goyle's confession, and the jury won't be short on outrage." Poirot sat, perfectly composed, and glanced at the folders. It is good that the justice system works so thoroughly, though often only after it has been shaken awake. Japp snorted. "You and your poetic metaphors. What's on your mind, Poirot? You didn't come here to admire the wood paneling." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "I have a concern, mon ami. A single detail continues to disturb me. Something unresolved." Japp sighed. "You always say that just before you ruin someone's retirement." Poirot ignored the jab. "It is about the scream." Japp blinked. "The scream, yes. The one that was heard by multiple people on the night of the murder. The one we assumed originated from Lady Agatha during her confrontation with Goyle. But let us reconsider it. Goyle claims they argued, that she slapped him, that he struck out in panic, and yet, if she screamed, as he says, it would have drawn someone into the room immediately. She didn't scream. She didn't." Poirot said flatly, "The scream occurred minutes before Goyle entered. We have this from Elsie's statement, which places her outside the corridor. She heard the scream. She saw the light. Then someone left the room. Then Lavery entered. Only afterward did Goyle arrive." Japp narrowed his eyes. "So if Agatha didn't scream, then who did?" Japp sat back. "Claiborne, unlikely," said Poirot. "She was calm, controlled, too clever to raise alarm. And yet someone did scream. That sound was real, not imagined." Japp was quiet for a long moment. "So what are you saying? That someone else was involved, a fourth player?" Poirot shook his head. "No, I am saying that one of the three Goyle, Claiborne, or Lavery is lying about the order of their actions. And you think it's Goyle? I think it is. Lavery?" Japp sat forward, incredulous. "But he was cleared by circumstance." Poirot said quietly, "Not by logic." He opened a leather folder he had brought with him. Inside was a page from the coroner's report that had not been part of the initial brief. It contained a small but revealing annotation. "Abrasion on victim's right palm. Not consistent with defensive wounds, possible friction burn. JAPP." Squinted. "What does that mean?" Poirot tapped the paper. "It means that Lady Agatha grasped something sharp or heated just before she died. Not the letter opener. Something smaller, perhaps metallic. And the only object found near the body that could cause such an abrasion." Japp blinked. "The matchbook." "Yes," Poirot said. "The one Lavery carried. The one with only one match missing." The inspector looked grim. "You think he was in the room first?" "I think he was in the room before Goyle, and before the scream. And I think he lit a match." Japp leaned back. "Why?" Poirot folded his hands, perhaps to burn something, perhaps to light a candle, or perhaps to threaten. The scream, Jap, may not have come from the victim. It may have come from Lavery. You're saying he panicked before the murder. I am saying he created the conditions for panic, that he may not have meant to kill, but his presence accelerated the chain of violence, and that he allowed Goyle to take the full blame, because it suited him to do so. Jap rubbed his face. You think he manipulated Goyle into killing her? No. I think he wanted something, perhaps protection for Isabel, perhaps revenge for the threat of dismissal. But he was already in the study before Claiborne. He told no one, and yet he had reason to fear discovery, and motive, however, emotional, but without proof. Poirot nodded. I will not accuse without proof. But Lavery is not innocent. He is simply not guilty of murder. There is a difference. Jap shook his head. You always leave me with grey areas. Poirot smiled faintly. Because justice, mon ami, is rarely black and white. Later that week, Isabel received a letter, handwritten and unsigned, delivered through a discreet solicitor. Inside was a single paragraph, neatly penned. You deserved more honesty than I gave. I failed you and your aunt in equal measure. But I hope, someday, you will understand that silence is sometimes the only way to live with what one has done. C.L. Isabel said nothing about it to anyone. Poirot, meanwhile, had returned to his London flat. He placed his files from the case into a wooden drawer labelled simply Harrington. But before locking it, he added one final note on top. Of the three who shaped the murder, only one struck the fatal blow. But guilt, like smoke, rises from every lit match. He closed the drawer. Then, satisfied, he took his walking stick, tipped his hat to no one in particular, and stepped into the London fog. It was a cold, cloudless morning in early December when the trial of Edwin Goyle and Lenora Claiborne began at the Old Bailey. London bustled around the courthouse in its usual indifferent rhythm, but inside the courtroom, the air was brittle with anticipation. Poirot sat quietly near the back, a discreet figure in a grey suit with a carefully folded handkerchief in his pocket and a gaze that missed nothing. The trial unfolded with the expected spectacle: court reporters scribbling, barristers speaking with theatrical cadence, and witnesses summoned to provide fragments of a shattered truth. The evidence against Claiborne was overwhelming. Financial records, witness statements, and intercepted correspondence laid bare her involvement in laundering funds through Goyle's accounts, all while presenting herself as a disinterested guest at Harrington Hall. She denied the allegations, but did so with diminishing conviction. Goyle, on the other hand, offered no defense beyond his original confession. His solicitor described a man under immense pressure, manipulated, ashamed, and unable to fully comprehend how swiftly he had become a murderer. His account of the night remained mostly consistent. A confrontation, a moment of rage, and then panic. But as Poirot listened, it was not Goyle's story that held his attention. It was the silence of one man who was never summoned to testify, Charles Lavery. He had left Harrington Hall days after the arrests and was now said to be in Edinburgh. Seeking employment under a different name, Poirot had traced his movements through private channels. Lavery had not vanished, he had simply chosen a quieter life, one with no inquiries, no interviews, and most crucially, no questions about his own actions that night. It was during a recess. On the third day of the trial that Poirot requested a private meeting with the presiding judge and submitted a sealed statement. It contained no accusation, only an analysis. Poirot had written, "It is my professional opinion that while Edwin Goyle delivered the fatal blow, the psychological framework leading to the act was constructed by a third party. This third party, Mr. Charles Lavery, was present in the room prior to the act, had direct knowledge of the motives in play, and departed knowing violence would follow. His emotional entanglement with Miss Harrington and his professional resentment toward the victim constitute an unexamined link in the chain of causality. Though this is not a chargeable offense, it is a moral failure that deserves acknowledgment." The judge accepted the letter without comment, and Poirot returned to his seat. He did not expect consequences for Lavery, not legal ones, but he believed in the power of the truth, even if delivered quietly, even if too late. The trial ended with the predictable verdict. Goyle was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 15 years. Claiborne was convicted of conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction. She received 18 years. Neither sentence would restore Lady Agatha, nor would it cleanse the estate of its shame. But justice, in its slow and imperfect form, had moved. After the verdict, Poirot visited Harrington Hall one final time. Isobel greeted him at the entrance, this time not as a suspect or a grieving niece, but simply as the new mistress of a house now hers by legal inheritance. "You look tired, monsieur." "Poirot," she said. "I am," he replied with a small smile. "Truth has weight, mademoiselle, and when one carries it for too long, the shoulders sag." She walked with him to the drawing room, now redecorated. The heavy carpets were gone, replaced with lighter colors. The portrait of Lady Agatha had been moved to a more modest spot in the hallway. "Did you ever speak to Charles again?" Poirot asked. Settling into an armchair, she shook her head. "He sent one letter, apologizing. That was all." "And what did he say?" "That he loved me, but that he had been a coward, that he could not face what happened, that he didn't know how to live in a world where people die because others stay quiet." Poirot nodded slowly. "That, at least, is true." They sat in silence for a time, outside. The trees were bare, their limbs edged against a grey sky, like the memory of things lost. Poirot broke the silence at last. "Do you know why he confessed that night?" She looked at him. "Charles. He said he killed her. Why confess to a murder you didn't commit?" She answered softly, "Because he thought he did. Because guilt doesn't wait for facts. It only needs doubt and emotion." Poirot leaned forward. Slightly. Yes, he believed himself guilty, because part of him wanted to suffer, to undo what had already happened. It was not justice he sought. It was punishment. Isobel's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Poirot stood. "You are strong, mademoiselle. Your aunt would be proud. But be careful. Some people carry the truth until it breaks them. Others bury it so deep they forget it was ever there. She nodded. And you? I ranged truths into order. That is all I can do. At the door, she handed him a small envelope. This was found behind the drawer in her desk. I think she meant for you to have it. Poirot opened it later, on the train back to London. Inside was a single note, written in Lady Agatha's bold hand. If something happens to me, do not trust appearances. Those who confess too soon are often trying to hide what they fear they will do next. Guilt does not always follow crime, but crime always follows cowardice. You of all people will understand this. A.H. Poirot folded the letter slowly. He leaned back in his seat, eyes closing for just a moment. Not in rest, but in reflection. The title of the case, if one were to assign it, had been obvious since the beginning. The murderer who confessed too soon. But now he understood that the title was never about Goyle. It was about Lavery. Not the killer, but the catalyst. The man whose confession came not from action, but from fear. The man who, in the end, had destroyed no one but himself. And Poirot, ever the arranger of truths, had let him go, because justice, he thought, is not always a verdict. Sometimes it is a mirror. In the weeks that followed the conclusion of the trial, life continued with its usual indifference. London pressed forward industrious, distracted, and largely unaware of the scandal that had briefly rippled through a corner of its social elite. At Scotland Yard, case files were closed and archived. In the newspapers, Lady Agatha's murder made fewer headlines by the day. Only those directly affected remained suspended in its aftermath, sorting through the emotional wreckage left behind. Hercule Poirot, for his part, returned to his flat on Fairway Street with no celebration, no fanfare. He resumed his daily routine's meticulous breakfast preparation, short walks through Hyde Park, and frequent correspondence with clients who rarely knew how to separate true danger from melodrama. Yet something from the Harrington case lingered, like the faintest trace of perfume on a well-folded scarf. Not guilt. Poirot knew the limits of his responsibility, but uneasy as it was on a quiet Thursday afternoon, as grey clouds softened the London sky and the distant clatter of carriages echoed across Fairway Street, that Hercule Poirot received a visitor. He had not been expecting anyone. The day had been uneventful, spent polishing his silver tea strainer, aligning the spines of his monogrammed books, and rearranging the position of a single vase of violets. Everything had its place, everything as it should be. Until the bell rang at precisely 3 p.m., his landlady showed the guest in. A man in his early 30s, thin, weary, and impeccably dressed in the way of someone trying to appear whole. Charles Lavery. Poirot gestured toward the armchair opposite his. Do sit down, monsieur. Lavery remained standing. I thought it only fair you hear it from me. Poirot tilted his head. You are under no obligation to speak. The court has closed its case. That's not why I'm here. Poirot said nothing. Silence, he had long ago learned, could be more persuasive than any question. I wasn't the killer, Lavery began, but I was the reason she died. He moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. That evening, I entered the study before Goyle. I'd come to speak with Lady Agatha. I meant to beg her to let me stay on, to reconsider her decision to dismiss me. I knew she had found out about Isobel and me. I knew she disapproved, but I didn't expect her to be so calm. She wasn't cruel, just final. Poirot watched him closely. Lavery continued. She told me she had already written a new will, that she had warned Isobel, that she had given Goyle a deadline. And then she said something that I didn't expect. She said she was planning to bring in the police, that everything had gone too far. And you panicked, Poirot said. Quietly, I did. I told her she was making a mistake, that Goyle wasn't capable of that kind of fraud on his own, that she was being manipulated. But she just looked at me like I was a child throwing a tantrum. Poirot leaned back. And so you lit a match. Lavery turned, startled. Poirot nodded. The burn on her palm. It came from the matchbook you carried. One match missing. An emotional moment. You threatened to destroy something. A letter. Perhaps. Lavery's voice cracked. I picked up the envelope she'd addressed to Mr. Cartwright. I didn't even read it. I just said, "This changes everything." And then she grabbed it. I think that's when she screamed. Poirot raised an eyebrow. So the scream was hers. Not from pain, from fury. She told me to leave. And I did. I stood in the hallway, shaking. That's when Goyle went in. He finally sat down, his voice low. I heard them arguing. Then silence. I waited. And then I saw the blood. Poirot didn't move. And you did not intervene. You let him believe he did it alone. I didn't let him. He ran out, and I just stood there. And when the others came, I said what I thought was true, that I'd killed her. Poirot folded his hands. Because you believed your presence had caused it. Lavery nodded. I still do. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. You may not have wielded the weapon, monsieur, but you set the scene. You carried your guilt like a badge, too soon, too eagerly. It was convenient, in a way, for Goyle, for Claiborne, even for you. Lavery looked up sharply. Convenient, you confessed before the crime had even been explained, Poirot said, voice clipped. Not from nobility, but from fear. You feared that your failure to stop it made you culpable. You feared that Isobel would suffer. So you spoke up before anyone asked questions. He leaned forward. You wanted punishment to replace responsibility. Lavery said nothing. Poirot stood, walked to the window, and adjusted the curtain an inch to the left. I have known many murderers, he said softly, some cold, some desperate, some so proud they never speak a word. But you, monsieur, are none of those. You are a man who believed too deeply in his own failure, who mistook silence for safety, and guilt for penance. Lavery swallowed hard. So what do I do now? Poirot turned. Live. Lavery blinked. You are not innocent, but you are not the killer. Your punishment is already served in solitude. In the eyes of the woman you loved, in the shame you will never entirely escape. There is no prison sentence harsher than conscience when it is fully awake. He took a breath. You will leave this room. You will not speak to the press. You will not seek redemption through spectacle, but you will live honestly. You will remember her, and you will not waste the silence she left behind. Lavery stood. Isobel will never forgive me. Perhaps not, Poirot said, but forgiveness is not always the destination. Sometimes it is only the road. Lavery left without another word. Poirot watched him go, then returned to his chair. He sat for a long while, unmoving, his hands resting on the arms of the chair, his gaze far away. The sun broke weakly through the clouds, casting a pale beam across the polished floorboards. Poirot rose, walked to his writing desk, and opened the file labeled Harrington. Inside, he placed one final document, a letter penned that day, to the Crown Prosecutor, though the legal matter is resolved. I submit the following note as a personal closure to the case of Lady Agatha Harrington. While Edwin Goyle and Lenora Claiborne bear direct legal responsibility, it must be recorded that Charles Lavery's presence and silence were pivotal in the psychological collapse that led to murder. Let it remain in the archive as a record not of guilt, but of the thin line between action and omission, and the consequence of mistaking confession for truth. He signed it, sealed the folder, and replaced it in the drawer. Then, with a quiet exhale, he straightened the edge of his desk blotter, brushed an imaginary crumb from his sleeve, and resumed his tea. Balance had returned, not perfect, but sufficient. Order, as always, restored. The letter sat unopened for 3 days on Hercule Poirot's desk. It had arrived without fanfare, slipped under the door of his Faraway Street apartment in a plain cream envelope, with no return address. The writing on the front was unmistakably feminine, slanted with practiced restraint. Poirot had not opened it immediately, not out of disinterest, but because he already knew what it would say. Some truths he had learned could wait. On the 4th day, with the rain tapping politely on the window panes and the scent of warm chamomile in the air, Poirot opened it. Monsieur Poirot, I have sold the house. Harrington Hall is no longer mine. The rooms were too large for me. The walls echoed with a kind of memory I couldn't quiet. I am writing to thank you not for solving the case, because I know you would say that truth needs no gratitude, but for knowing when to stop looking for a villain and start seeing the brokenness in the people left behind. Charles left a final letter. He has taken a teaching post in Dublin. He asked me to forgive him. I haven't answered, but I kept the letter. Perhaps that's something. I don't know if I believe in justice the way you do, but I believe in kindness, and in the end, you showed both. Yours, Isobel Harrington. Poirot read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it inside the Harrington case file. He did not reply. He rarely did when a letter felt complete. That afternoon, he took a walk. The fog hung low across the Thames, but the city, as always, carried on around its boots on cobblestone the cry of a newspaper vendor, the scent of coal fires in the breeze. Order, he thought, was never permanent. It was something one arranged again and again, like cutlery at the end of a meal. He paused on a bench overlooking the river. The case had given him everything he required: a body, suspects, motives, misdirection. But it had also offered him something less common: a layered deceit, where guilt was not worn by the killer alone. Lady Agatha Harrington had died believing she was doing the right thing. Edwin Goyle had struck the fatal blow, but under pressure, created not by rage, but by fear. Lenora Claiborne had poisoned the air long before violence was committed. Charles Lavery had confessed to a crime he did not commit, not to protect someone else but to bury the part of himself that knew he had set it all in motion, a confession made too soon by a man who feared what silence might reveal. And Poirot, he had seen it all, not immediately, not easily, but with the careful assembly of each truth, one upon another, until the pattern emerged not like a lightning strike, but a slowly developing photograph. He rose from the bench as the bells from St. Stephen's tolled the hour. Time, he thought, had a strange way of granting clarity when people least expected it. Back in his apartment, he added one final note to his journal. The true murderer confessed with his silence, not his words. The woman who engineered the crime never dirtied her hands, and the one who shouted "I did it" had done nothing except let everything happen. There are crimes of blood, crimes of deceit, and crimes of cowardice. All deserve their place in the record. Then, in a smaller hand beneath, order was not born from law. It was born from understanding. Lady Agatha's final justice came not in the courtroom but in the hearts of those who finally told the truth. That evening, Poirot placed the Harrington file into his cabinet, gently closing the drawer. It was done. The murderer had confessed. Too soon. But in the end, the truth had arrived precisely when it was meant to.